Hello, my name is Betsy. Welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to be showing you a drawing that I have actually been wanting to do for a couple of months, ever since I did the initial drawing in my journal back in Inktober. So by now that's November, December, so that's like more than 2 months. So here's the original drawing. And I did this, I think, on day 7, so it would have been October 7th. I had so much fun with it. It's all just a bunch of pipes and conduit and lines, and I just loved it so much. I did it in a much smaller page here because this was inside of my little journal. But today I'm going to make a slightly larger version of this, and hopefully this turned out okay. I think I did pretty good. I think I did pretty good. But I'm going to show you just some of the basic shapes that I use here. And I did actually have to turn this into a bit of a time lapse, just kind of speed it up, because the truth was it took me hours and hours and hours. I don't even remember anymore. It was so good though. So if you're like me, you know that when a drawing takes longer and longer, it's actually even better. It's not a burden in the slightest. So I just made sure to record the whole process. What you notice here is I'm almost drawing just these strange little almost rectangular pieces. They're not quite rectangular. So they're kind of like these long worms, and then really all I do is I kind of do these longest shapes, and at the very end, if I want to, I'll allow that shape to bend, just like a pipe, of course, or not. It can just be straight, and then at the very end, I add like this little cap onto it, and that kind of represents a connector. Because pipes, of course, do have to connect to each other or to other things in order to, do their job. And so that's essentially the very basic rule that I follow here for all of the pipes. They can be wide, they can be thin, they can be of any shape and bending in any way, and as long as those connectors are there for the most part, it kind of follows the pattern there, or kind of like the design. So you'll notice I'm just going to do them all over the place. And sometimes I'll just add these kind of long shapes that don't have any connectors on either end. When I draw those, I kind of imagine that they are just these little bends of pipe, or these little sections of pipe that kind of just peek out in between the others, and then they just kind of vanish behind them. So that's why I don't put any connectors on those. So just start notice kind of what I'm doing here. So I'm just using a lot of repeating lines. Occasionally I do add these little areas with lots of kind of vertical lines. Sometimes I choose the lines to be horizontal. But when I'm making those little pieces, what I'm trying to draw is like a little vent, something that vents or that radiates off some heat. So I'm going to basically also draw those kind of here and there, and they're also going to be just little rectangles with these little grills inside of them. They don't have to make sense, truthfully. This is all for fun. I just kind of imagine the types of things that are under the hood of a car. And so there's a lot of little pipes, lines. I know they're called lines, but it's just these little pipes that kind of allow either air or some kind of fluid or something to enter a certain chamber and then get kind of moved along so that it gets reused or it passes on through a different area. So that's all that I'm really doing, is I'm thinking about how can I connect things, where I can add these little grills and then add another pipe and then connectors. And usually it works out okay. This one was a lot of fun. I don't know why it took me so long to do this one. When I finally did it in Inktober, it worked up a little bit quicker because I did the shading with a little bit of an ink wash, and I was able to complete it much faster. For this one, you will notice in a few minutes, once I get towards the end, I am going to show you how I added some shading to this one using a pencil, which worked out fine. I think that I still prefer the ink wash though. If I ever do any kind of other shading, I might actually attempt to do it digitally. So this one project just gave me so many different goals and so many different things to try to think about or try to practice. So you notice here I'm just keep adding some more of those little sections. Lots of little pipes. I didn't realize how long this would take me because the size of this page, let's see, it is I think a half sheet. So if you take just a regular sheet of letterhead, that is 8.5 by 11, and just kind of fold it in half, that's what I'm using here, is a sheet of paper folded in half. So the other thing that you'll see me doing here is those little spaces that I just can't really fit anything into, I do one of two things here. I will either just fill those little spaces with lots of little lines that are just kind of really close to each other, just like that. Or I will just go ahead and fill it with black, and that's fine too. Usually the little lines, they can either be horizontal or they can be vertical. Those do a great job. It kind of implies that there's something in there, in that little dark spot, that there could be just like a little component or a little computer in there somewhere that's doing its job. So that's kind of the implication. Occasionally, if I can, I'll also include here and there a few little buttons or little dials or knobs if I feel like it, or honestly if I just remember, because I was just going with the flow, of course. And I try not to do too many of those. I just kind of sprinkle them throughout, just like a little round thing with a little circle inside, and that usually does it. I think that when I was drawing this, also, I was thinking a lot about one of my favorite shows. It was Firefly. Some of you probably have seen it too. It was just so good. It's a very kind of space opera kind of show, and it is definitely in a steampunk style. And when I was drawing this, I thought so much about the character that was spending a lot of time kind of in that engine compartment fixing things. And she always looked so adorable, and she was always fixing everything. And every time that I saw that, I always thought that I really wanted to draw that engine area, just like with a big mess of things and engine parts just kind of moving everywhere. And so maybe this wasn't exactly like the way that area was portrayed in the movie, but this was my idea of that. I imagined that there would be this room with just so much stuff in it, all these things there that needed to be checked and calibrated and worked on. And so this was my version of that. My version of the steampunk little scenario. What would it look like if some crazy person had to invent an engine that could take you into outer space, and yet it was done with some kind of weird steam technology? This is what it would be. I would need all of these pipes to be able to make it work. And so I just kept going. I kept going and I kept going, and essentially filled the whole page, building up this big kind of engine, this big machine. Because I know that in the machines, like if you have an actual engine in a car, you certainly have more than just pipes or conduit in there. There's a lot more going on than that. You generally will have computers that are there to control what's happening. You will have a lot of other moving parts as well, but I just kind of imagine this being like, if you were to look at an engine on a car, the top of it always seems to have all these pipes going on. That's because the engine is kind of behind there or underneath it. And so that's what this is kind of to me. This is an engine, but it's trapped inside because it's got all of these things hooked up to the outside of it. So that's kind of what I was going for. And you'll notice it really is just a repetition of that same concept. It's just the same type of pipe, and then I just change its direction, or I let it kind of bend a little bit to hug some of the other things around it. Instead of thinking of this as like solid metal pipe, think of it more as like rubber pipes or some kind of plastic or something that's a little bit more moldable, and then it starts to make a little more sense. So like lines that bring in water or gas or something like that. And then yeah, from there pretty much just have fun adding all these little connectors. Lots of little circles and buttons. Some of those could also be places where things got attached, like with little screws or something like that. There's a lot going on there. Unfortunately, I can't name everything. I know that I like to look at things that are kind of complex like this, but I'm not able to name everything. I know that there are bolts everywhere. I know that there are going to be cogs and all sorts of other things that might be moving, but for this one I stuck mostly to the pipes and grills. That's what this is, pipes and grills. And just kind of went with it. A lot of repetition. I really am enjoying the way that it looks too. I'm wondering how this would look if I did some stippling instead of the pencil shading that I'm going to do. It would probably look a whole lot different. whole lot different. But for now, it's just turning up really nicely. This is giving me a lot of ideas so that I can kind of start exploring more steampunk style things. I do love steampunk so much. At least visually, it's excellent. And so this is going to kind of lay the groundwork for some other designs that are going to look like that. So that maybe the next one that I draw won't be just kind of pipes and conduit like this one, but it might involve some more actual gears or machinery, or look a little more industrial in the sense that there will be parts that move. Maybe even we can design some robots. How about that? Lots of good stuff to draw. I think that in the past, when I used to draw and do things like these, I always felt somehow that as a girl, I wasn't allowed to draw these kind of things. Isn't that ridiculous? I know, I'm a ridiculous person. I talk a lot about the kind of things that I didn't do because I was insecure about it. And here's another one of those things. It's just, I know that I'm allowed to draw anything that I feel like it, but it almost feels like I had to draw flowers because that's what women draw, you know? And of course, silly me, I went with that. There's nothing wrong with flowers, of course, nothing wrong at all. I love drawing flowers, but I am going through this phase right now where I am being an adult and I'm giving myself permission to draw anything that comes to mind. And so that's what's happening here is pipes and conduit. I'm giving myself permission. It's so much fun. So, of course, since I'm here encouraging myself to continue drawing these kind of things, I'm going to encourage you to. It doesn't have to be lovely and pretty. It can be. Everything has beauty. Even strange shapes of neurons, anything that's tiny, anything that's huge, even a big jumble of pipes and conduit can look good. Cityscapes look good. There is beauty to be found in all sorts of art, so I definitely encourage you to play around. So you can see here that I'm at the point now where I'm starting to add some shading, and I'm just using a pencil. It isn't anything special. And then what I am also doing is just using this black watercolor marker to just kind of fill in the background. I have a habit of filling in the background with black. I could probably leave it alone and it would be fine, but there I go. Look at me go. I do this way too often. It's good though. I just really love seeing the way everything looks up against that stark background, just black. If I had more time, I would probably try to color it just so that it looks a little different. It's not just black. But this is my thing that I do, my habit. I promise that in some future drawings, I am going to try to do this without the black background. It's tough for me, you guys. It's difficult. I'm trying here. And so I'm just going to continue adding that. I'll be doing it just a little bit at a time. So as you can see, this is why it was so important to kind of speed it up. It took so many hours, so many wonderful, wonderful hours. Just kind of getting this thing, just little by little. You'll notice that really the pencil, all it's doing is giving me just a few little spots that are going to be little shadows. And I tend to place them kind of along the edges there. So I'm really just doing my best to kind of add tiny little shadows in the places where I think that it should be just a little darker. I think this is really all just a bunch of experimenting and just trying to see what looks good. So that's what I'm really doing, is just adding little bits of graphite. So now what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to speed this up just a little more. Again, this was such a very long process, and I want to make sure that you really are able to see what's going on here. So I had it a little slower, a little more manageable earlier, and now it's just going to start moving along a little bit quicker. So you can really see the way this is all starting to come together. I think that when I'm actually drawing just by myself, even if I'm recording, I take my time, and that's why this ends up taking hours, and I just enjoy it. And so in editing, I know that a lot of things change, but just keep in mind, this is a very slow process. It does take a lot of time. It does take... It requires you to kind of clear your thoughts and just kind of experience what's happening right there where you're sitting, right there where you're drawing. And it's just pretty much the greatest part of drawing. But what you're able to see here is it just going nice and quick. Of course, we all love time lapse. At least a lot of us love a little bit of time lapse. It's not for instruction, it's really just for being able to see how things change over time. Just gives that little bit of satisfaction. So you can kind of see I'm just continuing on with that pencil, and I occasionally shift over to using that watercolor pen again so that I can kind of add all of that black to the background, and it really makes it stand out. I think that's why I love doing that there. But you'll see any of those spaces where I added more graphite, so kind of in the center of the drawing there where it's just really crowded, I ended up adding a whole lot of graphite, and it actually really helped because what happened is it basically sent that zone deeper into the drawing, and so it's nice and dark and a little grainy. And I really like that. I think it just makes it look really neat. And again, we're experimenting here. We're just trying things out. We're just trying to see what works. So I'm hoping that you see this and there's some part of this that you like. Go ahead and try it out. Start drawing some of these little patterns. Try and see what happens. They're not that complicated on an individual level. Each one of them is pretty simple. Really what it is just getting practice, kind of layering them and getting them to fit around each other. That's where you're going to spend your time doing that. And then the shading is just like this little extra thing. That's what it is. If you're in the mood, you can shade it. You can color it. You got markers. There's all sorts of wonderful things that we can do here. And so here I'm kind of reaching the end. And certainly I've got so many more ideas that I want to try now that I've done this. It's definitely one that I want to recreate a couple more times. I do believe firmly in that practice does help. So sometimes it's really a good idea to take that same drawing, do it again and again and again, and see what kind of comes out different, because it's going to be just a little different depending on what you're up to. So this is pretty much it. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope that you enjoyed this, and I very much hope to see you in the next one. In the meantime, feel free to check out this video right here.